In today's story, I'll be telling you about a person spreading a global message, combining the often opposing worlds of fashion and sustainable environmentalism. Hello, it's James from the Global Portrait Project, where I'm painting 193 subjects with 193 nationalities. Join me today on my next step of the storytelling journey, where I'm connecting countries across the globe by highlighting environmental activity of an individual in each country. And today I'll be showing you portrait number 9 for the country of Australia.
Australia is the largest country in Oceania and the 6th largest in the world, comprising mainland Australia, the island of Tasmania and numerous smaller islands. The primary environmental concerns in Australia are from climate change, the introduction of invasive species, deforestation, pollution, overfishing, and the expansion of coastal metropolitan centres. The subject for my portrait for Australia is Clare Press, podcaster, author and activist, addressing the global problem of the environmental impact of the fashion industry. Clare uses her platform to empower people to think positively about ethical and sustainable fashion choices. I found Clare following a search for Australian environmentalists, which threw up an article in the Oxygen Project on Australia's top 10 eco-warriors, in which Clare was featured. This is Clare's story. Clare began her career working in fashion magazines at the age of 23. She'd studied politics at university and had always thought she'd be a political journalist, but fell for fashion. It seemed artistic, interesting and glamorous. Over the next 4 years, she worked for some smaller independent magazines, freelanced for Harper's Bazaar, and then got a job at Australian Vogue. Her job was to write about fabulous fashion. She then had a stint running her own small fashion label and had a little shop for a while before returning back to magazines. 2 events in 2013 and 2014 changed the course of her work life. The first was globally significant: the Rana Plaza garment factory collapse in Bangladesh, in which 1,138 people lost their lives. Clare remembers watching the news as the death toll climbed and realising that, as a fashion journalist, she was part of the broken, unethical system that resulted in this happening. She knew she had to make a change and start using her voice to advocate for a different kind of fashion industry. The second event was a more personal moment. Clare had interviewed the United Nations officer Simone Cipriani for a magazine. They talked about his work at the United Nations Ethical Fashion Initiative and what gave him purpose. Clare describes that she distinctly remembers telling him that she felt her own work and life lacked that something. "What can I do?" she asked. "I'm just a writer. I write about clothes." "Write a book," Simone boomed. He took the time to encourage Clare, and she took the time to write the thing, educating herself about sustainability along the way. Fast forward, and the Wardrobe Crisis podcast, based on that book, is Clare's full-time job. She has just launched an online course platform, Wardrobe Crisis Academy. She also co-hosts with Simone the United Nations Ethical Fashion podcast, and Series 2 has just finished. The book, The Wardrobe Crisis: How We Went from Sunday Best to Fast Fashion, came out in 2016. Back then, sustainable fashion was not mainstream, and her colleagues in fashion journalism didn't get it, thinking it was an odd little niche. But elsewhere there was a movement building. Today, Fashion Revolution, the campaign established as a response to Rana Plaza, asking consumers to ask #WhoMadeMyClothes, has teams in over 130 countries. Australia was the second one after the United Kingdom, and Clare has been on the Australian Advisory Board since it began in 2014. The first podcast guest back in 2017 was with Australian marine biologist and model Laura Wells, and they talked about ocean health and plastic pollution. Clare's most recent book is Rise and Resist. The idea for the book sparked in 2017 on a trip to the Great Barrier Reef with Australia's Climate Council to learn how climate change was impacting the reef and ocean health in general. The book is about activism and movement building, using narrative non-fiction to illustrate major problems and raise awareness. These days, the podcast is 100% global, although Clare is still active in what happens in Australia. In 2018, she pitched the role of sustainability editor to Australian Vogue. They agreed, and it was a world first that she pursued for 2 years until 2020. Sustainable fashion is a growing area in Australia. Clare is concerned that in many affluent countries, we buy clothes to throw away with little regard for the environmental or social impact of their production. Australians, for example, consume an average of 27 kilos of textiles per capita each year and dispatch around 23 to landfill. Clare states that fashion can seem a long way from conversations about environmental concerns or climate action, but that this is not the case. She uses her platform to spread awareness about fashion and sustainability because the two are deeply connected. The global fashion industry is responsible for approximately 4% of carbon emissions. That's about the same as the greenhouse gas emissions for Germany, France and the United Kingdom combined. Most of this, around 70%, comes at the raw materials and textiles manufacturing stage, but the sector also pollutes at all steps from creation to disposal. Manufacturing our clothes also leads to water pollution and all sorts of other things that, as an environmentalist, Clare is very keen to change. She believes that fashion can be made responsibly and is part of the movement for a more sustainable industry. Final words from Clare. Australia is bottom of the climate action class. We have so much abundance and privilege and so much to lose here, and yet we consistently fail to protect our wildlife and wild places while buttering up to the fossil fuel industry. If me talking about fashion or a frock or a sandal can get people fighting for Mother Earth, then I have done something useful. It's the Start Where You Are school of activism. If you'd like to find out more about Clare, I've put links to many of her media outlets and projects in the description below. There is more information about this painting and how to get involved with the Global Portrait Project on the website and Instagram page, and again the links are in the description below. Next time we'll be looking at climbing and activism in Austria.